Hey guys, how you doing? Welcome back to another video. Today is a very special day for the church because it's Palm Sunday. And so when we actually get the readings of today, we see that there are two gospels. There's a first reading and a second reading. So the first gospel, of course, is it's about Jesus entering Jerusalem on a donkey. And of course, the gospel later on is the Passion narrative. And so when we read the readings of today, especially the first gospel, the second reading, and the gospel later on, we see something incredibly important. And that is the humility of Jesus. In other words, we see Jesus as a true model for us to follow to grow in the virtue of humility. And so the reason why I want to talk about humility today is because it's something that we can all struggle with at times. And so I want to speak about why humility is important, what humility actually is and what it consists of. And yeah, let's get into it. So to understand what humility is, we need to know what the opposite of humility is, and that is pride. So pride is about yourself. It's about putting yourself before others. So in other words, pride is selfishness. Secondly, pride is about not showing charity to those around us, having a lack of charity, having a lack of generosity to others, because sometimes to show a lack of charity requires us to get out of our comfort zones. And so pride is very restrictive of how much charity we can show. And thirdly, pride does not allow your heart to be transformed. Pride is very restrictive of our own personal formation, because when we have pride in ourselves, we are not accepting people's inputs in our lives. We're not allowing those around us whom we can trust to be able to form our lives, to be able to transform our lives and make us better people. This is why pride is so dangerous, especially when it comes to trying to lead a spiritual life. Because if you're not allowing your heart to be transformed because of this big block of pride that you have in you, then it is hard for you to become the best person you can be, because you're not allowing God to direct your heart. So that's pride. And so like I said, the opposite of that is humility. So humility is about being selfless. It's about putting those around you in front of you first. And secondly, humility is about being charitable to those around us. It's about being Christ-like to people that are around us. And thirdly, humility, like I said, is the opposite of pride in a sense that you are humbling yourself. You are decreasing yourself so that God can work in your heart, transform your heart, and give you a renewal in your life. But for that to take place, we need humility. And so earlier I said that Jesus is the perfect example of humility. And we read that in the Gospels of today. First of all, the first Gospel during the procession is the Palm Sunday. It's the Gospel of Jesus entering Jerusalem. That in itself shows so much humility, because Jesus is God incarnate. Yet Jesus decides to enter Jerusalem in a donkey. Now just imagine the people in the time of Jesus would have expected the Messiah to come, in so much glory, with so much power, and so much in such an angelic way. But Jesus didn't come like that. He came in a humble donkey. So what does that mean? That means that even if Jesus, being God, shows that much humility, then that clearly shows that even in our lives, we need to show humility, because Jesus himself showed humility, and Jesus is perfection, and there is no one better to follow in perfection than Jesus. St. Paul reminds us that Jesus emptied himself, taking the form of a slave, being born in human likeness. So you see, that's what makes our God so special. We have a God who is not so separate from humanity, but desires to be in unity with humanity. And so Jesus, God who becomes incarnate in Jesus, becomes a slave in this world, dies on the cross for our salvation. And of course, the passion itself oozes out humility. And so, my dear friends, if Jesus, being God, shows so much humility, then how much more humility should we as humans show? There's something incredibly important that we need to remember, and that is that humility is not something that we can just have, but it's a grace from God. It's a virtue. It's something that God gives us. So, my dear friends, if you think, or if you want to have a breakthrough in your life, if you want to grow in this virtue of humility, then don't be afraid. Ask and you shall receive. Ask the Lord to give you this grace of humility, and Jesus will give you this grace, this virtue in abundance. A question that we can sometimes ask ourselves is this: is humility allowing injustice? And the answer to that is no. Humility is not about allowing injustice to take place, but it's about giving justice to God. Let God decide what is just. And when we offer that to God, in return, what does God do? He gives us the strength, the graces that we need to overcome all the hurt that we may have experienced from all the injustice that we ourselves may have faced. And a perfect example of this is the disciples. Jesus' death itself, we all know, was injustice. Jesus did no crime. Jesus was innocent blood. Yet, when they crucified Jesus, first of all, Jesus himself did not curse those who were crucifying him, but he said, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." So even to forgive requires a heart of humility. And then the disciples are another example. When they saw that their master had died, had been crucified unjustly, they did not go after all those who had persecuted Jesus and try and bring justice. Instead, what they did was give justice to God, and their duty was to preach about the crucified Christ, to preach about this Jesus who had died for the whole of humanity. So, my dear friends, that is a perfect model for us to follow. Give God the justice and let us act according to how Jesus would want us to be. Let us act like Jesus. Let us use Jesus as that model of humility. Earlier, I mentioned about how growing in humility is very challenging at times. So what I want to give you guys is 3 ways in which I try and grow in humility. And I'm still work in progress, but these are ways that I try, and I want to share these things with you. So the first way is through regular confession. So by going to regular confession, you are first of all confessing your sins, and you're getting rid of all your sins. And what that does is it shows an act of humility on your half, because by acknowledging your sins and confessing them, you're basically saying, Lord, these are my imperfections, these are my weaknesses, these are my sins. I have fallen many times, Lord, and I offer these imperfections to you. And then what Jesus does is, through that priest, absolves you from all your sins, and he fills you with the graces that he wishes to shower upon you. And so when you go to confession and get rid of all your sins, you are then God is giving you a new heart of humility, of humbleness, one that desires to grow in the love of Christ. So the second way in which I grow in humility is through regular sacrifices. And when I say sacrifices, I don't mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be big sacrifices, but it can be, small sacrifices that you would perhaps have to do for others. So I guess when I say sacrifices, I mean also doing acts of charity, going out of your comfort zone and going out of your way to help others, or doing your own penitential sacrifices to and offering those to God. Because by doing that, you are admitting that you are giving yourself to God, that you yourself are becoming an offering to God. And to do that requires humility. And so doing regular sacrifices, I don't know, like, for example, abstaining from something that you really like to eat, you like to drink, or from if you know that you have an addiction to TV or to gaming, and or if you realize you've been playing that too much, making a sacrifice there and offering that time that you give to gaming to God, that requires humility, because again, you are stepping out of something that you're comfortable with, and you are putting yourself in a place where you're offering yourself completely to God. The third way in which I try and grow in humility is one that carries on from the previous one of sacrifices, and that is doing things that we don't regularly, like doing things that we wouldn't, fancy doing, and even when it comes to ministry, sometimes we only like to do things for God if it also brings us satisfaction. And whilst that's good, because sometimes that can encourage us to do more good works for God, at the same time it can also potentially feed our pride. And so that is why it's so important at times that if we want to get closer to God and do more works for God in a powerful way, it is also important that we do things that we don't like. But in doing those things that we don't like, we offer them to God as a sacrifice. So again, there's a connection between doing sacrifices and doing things that we don't really like doing. And so those are my 3 ways in which I try and grow in humility. And so guys, I just want to end with this. Those words of St. John the Baptist: I must decrease and he must increase. In all that we do in our lives, in all our daily works, let us offer it to God, glorify God, and in that grow in humility. Let us try and practice charity with those around us. Even if it's so difficult, try small acts of charity. And the more you do these small acts of charity, you will grow in your heart towards humility. So my dear friends, I hope you have a great Palm Sunday. And I hope you have a great Holy Week ahead of all of you. And I pray that this Holy Week is a time of transformation for you all, and a time where you can get even more closer to God. Thank you so much, guys, for listening. I hope you have a great week ahead. Take care.